All right, so we're going to be looking at trigonometry. So we're going to be looking at a very basic approach to trigonometry. Later on in pre-calculus and even algebra, you'll probably look at this more in depth. But trigonometry is a relationship between angles of triangles and the sides. So we've looked at Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and using that to get the other sides of a right triangle. Well, with trig, what we can do is we can get sides based off an angle. So we're going to use only right triangles for this. Right triangle trigonometry is the basic trig that you will first look at. And so we know that one of these angles is a right angle. We're going to be calling the other one a reference angle. And the variable there is theta, or if you're in England, theta. But we're going to call it theta. So the reference angle is where we are. So, if I'm standing right here at this angle, that's my point of reference, thus the name reference angle. And so from this, there are some sides. So obviously we have the hypotenuse, but then directly across from me, that's the opposite side. And right next to me, there are two sides. One of them is the hypotenuse, so the other one I call the adjacent side. Technically, the hypotenuse is adjacent, but we call that the hypotenuse because that's a more specific name. And based off these sides, we have certain relationships for the angle. And these are called sine, so this is sine, this is cosine, and this is tangent. So here's my reference angle, theta. I have my hypotenuse, I have my opposite side, and I have my adjacent side. The sine is going to be the opposite side over the hypotenuse. The cosine is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. And the tangent is the opposite side over the adjacent side. So notice I'm not saying that this is theta. I'm not saying this angle is the opposite over the hypotenuse. I'm saying the sine of the angle. So these are specific functions. So this is saying the function of theta is equal to the opposite of hypotenuse, over the hypotenuse. And so if you notice the first letters, S-O-H, C-A-H, T-O-A, this is a way that a lot of people will use to memorize. So they'll say SOHCAHTOA. And by saying SOHCAHTOA, they'll memorize sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So you can tell yourself SOHCAHTOA, and you'll be able to memorize all these fractions just a little bit better. So here's what some problems look like. So here, I want to find the sine of Z. So my reference angle is Z, and we know that sine is going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, looking straight across, the opposite side is 18. The hypotenuse is 30. That's a fraction we can reduce. They both have a common factor of 3, so we get 6 over 10. Actually, better one we could have factored out would have been 6, so we get 3 over 5. So we know that the sine of Z is equal to 3 over 5. It's very important you write it like this and you don't say this. We have to take the sine of something. So no, do not do that. Cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So if I'm looking at cosine of A, there's my reference angle A. The adjacent side is 35, and the hypotenuse is 37. So we want to say that the cosine of A is equal to 35 over 37. Tangent. Tangent is just opposite over adjacent. So in this case, if I'm looking at the tangent of A, the opposite side is 24, the adjacent side is 18. They both have a common factor of 6. So we factor out that 6 and get 4/3. So we get tangent of A is equal to 4/3. And for the sine of x, we get, so there's our angle x. We know we're looking at the, yet again, opposite side over the hypotenuse. So the opposite side here is 40. The hypotenuse is 50. So we get sine of x is equal to 4/5. Now, one important thing about trigonometry, we only want fractions. If you give me a decimal for any of these, it will be wrong. So is sine of z equal to 0.6? Sure, 3/5 is 0.6, but we don't want 0.6. We only want the fraction. Later on, so not in this class, but in future classes, you will be working with fractions that you can't convert to a decimal. So something like 3π/5. And so in order to prepare you for that, you need to get familiar with writing these answers as fractions. So do not write your answers as decimals. But the rest of everything is pretty simple. So understand SOHCAHTOA and you'll be perfectly fine.